Hello my beautiful friends, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another episode of Vlogmas. Today's video is probably going to be a little bit on the shorter side, and that is because today we are going to be talking about mechanical eating, what it is, who it's for. And I also asked you guys to let me know if you had any questions or if I needed to clarify anything. So if you are looking to understand what mechanical eating is, then this is probably the video for you. So I think that that's a great place for us to start. So what is mechanical eating and when is it used? And mechanical eating is a tool that is used when you are trying to restore your body's hunger cues and fullness cues. So if you come from any sort of past with restriction or binge restrict cycle, anything like that, then mechanical eating can be a very helpful tool, because sometimes the communication that you have with your body is just simply not present. And what I mean by that is if you ignore your body's hunger cues often enough, which we tend to do when we diet a lot, when we restrict, whatever it might be, then those hunger cues that you used to have very naturally will slowly disappear and vanish over time. But just because they go away, it doesn't mean that they can never come back. So mechanical eating is basically the gateway to getting those hunger cues back. So what mechanical eating is essentially an eating schedule. So what I mean by that, I'm just gonna give you a random example, is for somebody to have breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, and then snack before bed, for example. This is gonna look different for every individual because how you come up with your eating schedule really depends on the individual and is really a case-by-case thing. And this specific eating schedule, while in recovery, is meant to be followed regardless of how you are feeling, and also regardless of your hunger. So for example, you wake up and you realize that you need to eat breakfast, but you're not hungry. With mechanical eating, you would sit down anyway and eat your breakfast regardless of how you feel. So with mechanical eating, you eat according to a schedule and not based on your hunger cues. And the reason that this is done is so that we can repair our hunger cues for the future. And at first, mechanical eating can feel very foreign and very uncomfortable, especially when you are eating when you're not feeling any sort of hunger cue. But the reason that we do this is to establish trust within the body as well, to understand that it is going to consistently receive food. We continue to do this so that our body learns to trust us again. And when your body puts trust in you, your hunger cues are slowly going to come back. And I wanted to do a little disclaimer, and I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again. Intuitive eating is not for people who are in recovery. And the reason why is because most people do not have their hunger cues and satiety cues while having any history with restriction or binging or compensation. And so in order to ever even think about intuitive eating, mechanical eating is typically a stepping stone. Does that mean that everybody who intuitively eats had to use mechanical eating? Absolutely not, but I am talking more towards people who have restricted in the past, whose hunger cues are all over the place, who have difficulty with satiety, and difficulty just knowing if they're hungry or not in general. Because the thing is that our bodies have the innate ability to self-regulate. So when you are a baby, you cry when you are hungry and you are fed, and you also stop when you are full. And as we grow up, these hunger and fullness cues, they shift and they change. And most of the time, this change comes from things like dieting, things like restriction, things like feeling shame around food, and then creating rules in which you have to abide by. All of this can play a role in why we don't have our hunger and fullness cues anymore. We end up losing track of how to listen to our bodies. And in some cases, when you restrict so much, your body doesn't even have the energy to communicate with you that you are hungry. So what I mean by that is that when we eat, we get energy. But if we continuously undereat and if we continuously restrict ourselves, we only have a certain amount of energy that can be allocated to all of our needs. And when your body has a limited amount of energy, it needs to use that energy as efficiently as possible. And so what I mean by that is that your body is going to send all of its energy to the most important things. So things like brain function, having your heartbeat, making your blood flow correctly. It's going to use the energy for the most important things out there. But by the time it's used all of its energy, unfortunately, it doesn't have any left. It has no energy left to communicate your hunger signals to you. So those are one of the first things to go. And mechanical eating, what it's about, this eating schedule, it's not about rules. at all. It's about building trust with your body once again. And mechanical eating helps establish a regular pattern of eating. And when we eat regularly and consistently, our body is able to build awareness around our fullness and hunger cues. And soon our body is also better equipped at separating feelings and thoughts from actual physical sensations. Because if you've ever suffered from a restrictive eating disorder, that eating disorder is going to do anything and everything in its power to convince you that you are not hungry. And when we hear the same thing over and over and over again, unfortunately, it's a reality that we usually end up believing. So with mechanical eating, when we do receive food consistently, eventually it makes it a little bit easier to decipher those feelings and thoughts versus your actual needs. So as I mentioned, mechanical eating is sort of a schedule or a structured plan. And this doesn't mean that you have a food agenda for your entire day by any means. All that it means is that there is a certain time of day where you're seated at your dinner table or at your desk, whatever it might be, and eating regardless of how you feel. So this provides a lot of structure and also a lot of support during your eating disorder recovery. And what I mean by support is you showing up for yourself multiple times a day, even though you don't want to. However, this is not meant to be forever. Mechanical eating is not something that we do for the rest of our lives. And at the beginning stage of recovery, hunger and fullness signals are not always reliable. However, as your hunger cues repair over time, soon you will be able to tell if you are hungry or not. And when that happens, you can potentially take that as an opportunity to listen to yourself instead of the mechanical eating rules. But there's also a chance that your eating disorder will still live in tandem with these hunger cues. So what that means is that when you do take the step away from mechanical eating and you are listening to these hunger cues, the most important thing is to always honor them no matter what that ED voice says. And so my recommendation for mechanical eating is to continue to do it, to regulate those hunger signals, and also use it as an opportunity to challenge that ED voice. When that voice gets quieter and when you feel more comfortable responding to your hunger and with the feeling of fullness, then I think it is potentially time to take a more intuitive approach. But until that shift of mindset happens, I do not personally think it's possible. Mechanical eating is a very important tool that can help with weight restoration or simply just providing the body with the nourishment that it needs on a day-to-day basis. But most importantly, I think it establishes regular eating patterns, which is something that we don't see very often with eating disorders. But you need to trust the process to get there. Mechanical eating is a very tough process, but it is a form of self-care even if it doesn't feel like it. I'm going to go through a couple of questions that were asked on my YouTube community page as well as on Instagram, so let's go through them. One of the questions is, what is the difference between mechanical eating and intuitive eating? And intuitive eating, you are relying on your own hunger cues because they are all repaired, they are all present, where mechanical eating is a lot more structured and it's used in order to repair hunger cues in the first place. Somebody asked, can mechanical eating help with binge eating? And I know that my response would change on a case-by-case basis. It really depends on the individual, the frequency of binging, their history, the root cause of binging, the main cause of binging, not the only reason. I have an entire video on binge eating if you're interested, but the main reason people binge is because they restrict. And so mechanical eating is consistently eating, which can definitely help with your restrictive patterns. And if you have any binge foods or trigger foods, to include them in your meals on a daily basis can potentially help with binge eating. Will mechanical eating cure everything? Absolutely not. Not with any single disorder out there, because there's usually a lot more work and unlearning that we have to do behind the scenes, unlearning our own internalized fat phobia, relearning our worth and what makes us worthy as a human being, really reconnecting with our values and what's important. But mechanical eating can definitely be a stepping stone and something that can definitely be beneficial while in recovery from binge eating disorder. I got a lot of questions on how to transition from mechanical eating into intuitive eating, and I touched on this very briefly, but let's dig a little bit deeper. So intuitive eating is a flexible way of eating that is guided by internal cues. So if you don't have internal cues, unfortunately, intuitive eating is not something that you would be able to fully participate in. Intuitive eating is also a lot more complex than eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. It's also about giving yourself complete permission to eat anything without judgment. So you are not good if you eat a salad, and you are not bad if you eat a burger. They are just food. And we sort of need to be able to view food through that neutral perspective. So in order to begin to engage with intuitive eating, or at least dip your toes into that water, we need our hunger cues to be back. So typically what that means is we need to participate in mechanical eating and create better communication with our bodies. And we also need to be able to see food in a more neutral lens. So if you are constantly labeling food as good or as bad or healthy or unhealthy, I promise you that engaging with intuitive eating is not going to be helpful at that moment, because it can't truly be intuitive if the entire time you are judging yourself for the choices and decisions that you make. When we jump into intuitive eating too early, it definitely gives our eating disorder a lot of leeway to create new rules and to almost take intuitive eating and transform it into a new diet, which it absolutely is not. So when you feel comfortable enough to navigate food in a morally neutral way, and when you respond to your hunger without guilt, or with very little guilt, because that is something that can be an ongoing process, then I think leaning more into intuitive eating can be beneficial in the long run. But also, just because we go forward doesn't mean that we can't go back. So what I mean by that is, if you end up trying intuitive eating and you realize that that eating disorder voice is coming back up, or that you are creating new rules, or that you are trying to offset your hunger in any way, shape, or form, then going back to mechanical eating until we fix some of those issues and resolve some of those conflicts that are going on, intuitive eating is always going to be there. So don't feel any shame. Don't judge yourself if you try and then need to revert back to mechanical eating. Recovery is not linear. We go up and down, and that is perfectly okay and perfectly normal. I received a lot of questions of how long should I mechanically eat for, and you probably guessed it, but this is different for everybody because every single body is different. So remember what the purpose of mechanical eating is, right? It's to repair your hunger cues. And this is going to look different for everybody. It's going to take everybody a different amount of time to listen to the range of cues from their bodies. And it's also going to take people a different amount of time to appropriately respond to your hunger cues in a timely fashion. So I know that that's not the answer that you were hoping for, but every single person is different. And also their past and their history with disordered eating can also play a huge role in their mechanical eating journey as well. Somebody asked, should you force yourself if you're uncomfortably full? The point of mechanical eating isn't to make you full to the point where you feel sick, but sometimes you will be sitting at that table, you will not be hungry, and you will still be eating. And that's because the reason that you're not hungry tends to be because your hunger cues are off, not because you actually don't need food. And the last question that I'm going to ask is, can this also help with lack of enjoyment with food, or is this mainly for repairing hunger cues and satiety cues? And I just want to say that it is separate. Mechanical eating can definitely help, especially if you also have difficulty recognizing those hunger cues and giving yourself permission to eat. But lack of enjoyment when it comes to food is a different topic. And if that is something that you would like me to talk about, or how we can bring more joy and life into our food, then please let me know in the comments down below. I hope that this video was concise and that you learned something from it, or that I did answer your questions. If you have any other questions, or if anything is unclear, then please just leave me a kind comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my next video. Make sure to do something kind for yourself. Bye, friends.